Our speaker today is going to be Jennifer Wright from the Canadian Ag Human Resource Council. Jennifer grew up working in her family's farm equipment dealership and helping on the farm in southwestern Ontario. She has worked in the field of human resources, research and development for more than 20 years. Jennifer has worked with several industries, including agriculture, leading initiatives related to inclusion and diversity, attraction and retention, work integrated learning, labor market research, skills development, training and education. She holds a Master's of Business Administration from Royal Roads University and is a member of the Human Resource Professional Association. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. I know our attendees today, as well as those that will be catching it afterwards, are really looking forward to your advice and expertise. So thank you so much. Again, like I mentioned, opportunities for discussion and questions at the end of the webinar after we've heard from Jennifer. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll be sure to ask her at the end. Thank you, Jennifer. I will leave it to you. You can take it away.
Excellent. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today for this really important topic. There's lots of information that can be shared around this topic. I'll try to give you some highlights on the importance of it, but also some tips on how you can look at your own workplaces and make them a bit more inclusive and diverse. So for those of you that may not be aware of who the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council is, we're a national nonprofit. We work with the agriculture industry across Canada, looking at HR issues, helping the industry address some of the issues that may come up, as well as doing a lot of labor market research and looking at what that labor supply looks like, and putting some data around some of the labor shortages, for example. All the work that we do is led by industry stakeholders as well. So what I thought I would do is just start out a little bit, talk a little bit about why the topic of, or looking at making our workplaces a bit more diverse and inclusive is important. Some of the research that we do certainly quantifies the labor shortages that I'm sure many of you as employers are feeling. And when we look at that labor shortage into the future, we do a 10-year forecast. The current labor gap is 63,000, but looking forward, it's forecasted to grow to about 123,000. So certainly a need to look at attracting more people to work in the industry. And a lot of the work that we do also working with primary producers, hearing directly from primary producers that increases having the increase in the shortage is really not a sustainable thing either. In some cases, there's been a way to make up for that shortage in the short term by just working longer hours. That's not really sustainable. So we really need to start looking at how we can increase the labor pool that we're recruiting from, and make sure that we're also creating really good inclusive workplaces so that once we do that recruiting, people want to stay and work in the industry. By doing this, we'll be able to help ensure that we can meet the demands in the industry and make sure that that we are able to grow the industry as well. So this just highlights the increase in demand a little bit more too, and looking at how that supply is not meeting it. And the other issue that is facing the industry is turnover, and it's another reason why taking time to look at your work environment and making sure it's an inclusive and diverse work environment will really help decrease this cost of turnover as well. It'll mean that the effort that you put into recruitment and is going to pay off, because you will be retaining the employees that you recruit. So when we look at the agriculture industry overall, we talked a little bit already about the shortages and the number of jobs that need to be filled. But then when we look at the who will do the work and what the industry looks like, we look at the labor market as a whole in Canada. The Canadian population has about 1/3 of the Canadian population will be members of a visible minority by 2031. Women make up 50% of the general population and the labor force, but really when we look at the on-farm labor force, it's only made up by about 30% women. The Indigenous population is the fastest growing demographic in Canada, and there's about 17,000 immigrants that are expected to enter the agriculture workforce by 2025. So what is a diverse workplace? It's really one where people can come to work, they know that they're in an environment where everyone respects one another's differences, you appreciate the contribution each person makes, you try to understand the different perspectives that people bring, and it's an environment where you try to include everyone in social and work-related activities. There's lots of benefits to a diverse workplace. I think there's been a lot of research done in this area where, you know, the evidence on the return on investment of having diverse approaches to work, diverse thoughts, having different work and life experience brought to your workplace can really help bring new ideas, new ways of doing things, create more efficiencies and innovation. And so, you know, the benefits are very clear. Certainly for agriculture, when we start to look at diversifying your workplace, you're able to attract new and untapped communities of job seekers. So very important when we look at that labor shortage. You improve employee satisfaction and performance. You avoid costly legal or regulatory issues, and we'll talk a little bit about your legal requirements today as well. You enhance your firm's reputation in the community, and you reduce that costly and disruptive turnover that we just talked about. So some of the legal obligations that you do have as an employer are really set out in legislation, both at a federal and provincial level. So if you haven't already, you do want to become very familiar with your human rights legislation and your Employment Standards Acts, both from a federal point of view and then your provincial or territorial point of view as well. But certainly at a federal level, which is applicable across everything that we do in Canada, you do need to make sure that your recruitment ads, application forms, like every aspect of your recruitment and your HR management is free of discrimination and meets the legislation that is laid out in the human rights legislation. It is illegal to discriminate against someone based on age as well. So you have to also think about the fact that candidates of all ages make great workers. And there's a number of other areas that you want to get familiar with as far as discrimination goes. The Canadian Human Rights Act is very clear where it entitles all individuals to equal employment opportunities. So regardless of religion, age, as we just mentioned, gender, and including pregnancy and childbirth, marital status, family status, mental or physical disability, pardon convictions, and sexual orientation. So when you think of this and you think of how you're recruiting, questions that you might have asked in the past, or things that you may have in your job descriptions, for example, you always want to make sure that that they are free of the discrimination around these points, or any points, really. As well, when you're thinking about, you know, how you go about trying to recruit a more diverse talent pool, a more diverse applications from a more diverse group than you typically would, you need to start to think about your recruitment process. And this can be, you know, thinking about where you're recruiting. Where do you post your job ads? Are they, you know, in the same local paper, or are you sharing that you're hiring with just your neighbors and not really getting out there? You think about, you know, if you're wanting to increase that labor pool, maybe think about advertising, reaching out and creating a relationship with an immigrant serving agency, for example, that may have some great candidates for you. You could share your job posting there. Looking at, broadening the places that you're recruiting from. You also want to think about language, the type of language that's in your job description and the type of language that you're using to try to attract people. We'll talk a little bit more about this this morning as well. And think about the image that you have. Think about if your organization has a website, does your image reflect a diverse workforce? Are there pictures that really, show a very similar type of worker in all of the photos? This may not be, if a job applicant is looking at your website, thinking about applying, if they don't see themselves in the image that your business is putting forward, they may not apply. So there's these type of things that you want to be looking at, as well as the process. How is that recruitment process happening? Making sure that in that process, you don't have discrimination built in. Think about the hiring process and what biases may be there, which we'll also talk a little bit more about this morning. So the first place to start is really looking at that job description and the job ad that's going out. And by making sure that you're adding those diversity requirements to your job description, as well as the job ads that are going out, you're clearly stating that your firm or your business is taking the issue of inclusion and diversity very seriously. And it also enables you to hire, access, and promote workers based on their ability to contribute to an inclusive and tolerant workplace. So again, it goes back to making sure the language in the job ads, make sure the language in the job descriptions are supporting the message that you're giving to your employees and your potential employees that you're committed to that inclusive work environment. And this just gives some examples on how you can do that when you're communicating with job seekers. For example, making a statement in your job ad and job description about your commitment to promoting a workplace that welcomes everyone. Making sure that in that job requirement, you're removing things like, heavy lifting, or when you're looking for someone that may have a heavy lifting requirement for a job, that you remove things like the type of body strength that you need or that kind of thing. Avoid technical language where possible. The more plain language and short and simple sentences adds, really provides a bit more clarity to your job as well, and ensures that anyone that may be looking at your job posting that doesn't have English as a first language, for example, understands the job requirements. You also want to think about adding skills that support diversity to that job description or job ad, such as trust others, communicates respectfully. Things like this will really help. And you can even, do things like state that international education credentials and experience are valued. You may also want to consider adding behaviors to the job descriptions that again support that level of commitment to an inclusive work environment, making sure that that people in your environment do understand and follow your workplace diversity and inclusion policies, that they recognize their own attitudes, beliefs, and values, modify their behaviors to align with the values of diversity and inclusion. Look for those opportunities to learn about individuals that may have a different background or come from a different experience. Respect the similarities and the differences amongst your workforce, and build positive relationships. And again, using that inclusive language can really go a long ways to helping with this environment and creating that inclusive environment. There are some examples of inclusive language that can be used not only in your job ads and job descriptions, but things that you may want to consider when you're reviewing your employee handbook or your employee policies, and things that you may want to consider when you're talking to people, your employees, as well as your customers and clients and suppliers. So the value of diversity in a workplace, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning. where there's lots of research showing that there's a really good return on investment of having a diverse workplace. What I will say, and what I've seen often, is focusing only on diversity will not be a successful route. You do need to ensure that as you look to recruit from a more diverse labor force, that you also really focus on ensuring that your work environment is inclusive. Because if you are just focused on recruiting from a diverse workforce, once those people join your organization, your business, they may not want to stay if they don't feel like they're included and that workplace is inclusive, and they don't feel valued. So it's not as simple as just considering people with different backgrounds to be hired in your business. You do also need to really think about creating that inclusive workplace for people from various backgrounds, ages, ethnicities, sexual orientation, religion, all that kind of thing. Creating that work inclusivity in your workplace will support success in your diversity recruitment strategy. So again, it's more than just observing those legal and policy requirements. You do need to make sure that you're promoting a workplace that's inclusive, accepting, respectful, you're recognizing those differences, and that you not necessarily are following the old golden rule of treat others as you want to be treated, but that you're thinking about how others want to be treated themselves. You want to be considering things like differences that may be there from communication styles, life experience that people may bring, may be very different, and working styles. And I find it very interesting, having grown up on a farm and in an agriculture business, that life experience, people bring different experience to the workplace, and it can be as simple as not having grown up on a farm before. But the different experience that you bring to the workplace could help provide new ideas and more innovative ways of doing things. So when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, it's really a broad stroke of what that what diversity can mean. And when we look at that labor pool going forward, we touched on this a little bit already, but the necessity to ensure that we are very clear on the need for inclusion can really be seen in the data. Non-white workers are paid an average of 19% less than white workers, for example. 15% of workers today have experienced some form of discrimination based on their gender. As much as 43% of gay people have reported experienced discrimination and harassment in the workplace. There you can see these type of stats that really show that you want to be ensuring that your workplace is not contributing to this type of discrimination. And by taking time to review your policies, your work environment, and how you're doing things will help ensure that your work environment is creating really that inclusive workplace and not contributing to these forms of discrimination. And so one thing that we do need to think about is as we look to ensure that our workplaces are inclusive, we need to recognize that everyone has biases. You need to be able to recognize what those biases may be, and also put things in place that may be able to eliminate them or remove them from your decision-making process, for example, or how you work. And being aware of the fact that you have biases and then being aware of what those biases may be will help you work towards eliminating them. And they can come with everything from stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination, all these type of things. And it may be even a bit subconscious. You don't know that you're doing it and you don't mean to be doing it, but it may come across that way. So some examples, not paying attention when certain people share ideas or contribute to the conversation, greeting certain colleagues at work but ignoring or avoiding others, getting irritated when certain people speak or share ideas with the group. These are all real simple biases that many people have, and you may not be as aware of them. There's also biases that might not be as overt around, body language, the tone of voice that you use, not acknowledging people as mentioned, and body language, talking to people with closed arms across your chest, not paying attention, rolling your eyes. These type of things are things that you want to be aware of and ensure that you are trying to address them as much as you possibly can. As well, when you're interacting with others, these are just great things to be thinking about when you're interacting with your employees anyway, but you do want to make sure, be aware. Am I listening? Am I including and excluding people? Am I encouraging everyone to participate? Who do I encourage and praise? Is it consistent across the board? And do I consistently overlook anyone? You also want to think about ways of interacting in a positive way. Certainly a negative way, I think, which we may not be aware that we're doing, and it's good to pay attention to, is ignoring, using negative verbal, nonverbal behavior, or looking at your phone when someone's talking, not paying attention. So we want to be cognizant of how we're interacting with others in a more positive way, making sure that we're paying full attention, seeking input from others, making sure that you're acknowledging their contributions, and giving credit to others for their ideas. The Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council has a Agri-HR toolkit, and in that toolkit, we do have a bias awareness checklist. These are things that you could easily Google as well and maybe able to find something. It's good to go through it just to kind of think about different things that you may have a bias, and going through the checklist can create a bit more awareness of it, and then you can think about how you can work towards eliminating it, or at least reducing the impact that it has on your decision making and your interaction. Some good examples of inclusive behavior for managers again, we go back to the idea of it's not just about attracting a diverse workforce. It's also about ensuring that you're creating an inclusive work environment. And when we talk about that inclusive work environment, there's examples that you can put in your job ads that say that you're an inclusive work environment, but how do you ensure that you're walking the walk within your own organization? So if you have managers, or if you're the main employer yourself, you want to make sure that you're putting diversity and inclusion issues in an open and transparent way, that you address them. You talk about cross-cultural, complex cross-cultural and inclusive related misunderstandings, that you demonstrate that you're committed to that fair workplace, and that you're in building your diverse work teams. You are ensuring that your HR practices and policies support that as well, and that you're always aligned with human rights and employment legislation. So lots of things here that you can put in place and ensure that these behaviors are happening from leadership, whether you're the leader or you have many other leaders with you, that this type of activity is happening. From workers, you want to ensure that they have a clear understanding of that workplace diversity and inclusion, what the policies are, and how they can ensure that they're working in a respectful way with their colleagues as well, and that if there's any issues with this maybe not occurring, that they're addressed and dealt with as well, so that again you support that inclusive work environment. Ways to promote inclusion, things like if you have a worker that has a first language that might not be English, that you're more patient, that you learn a few words maybe in their first language, just to greet them and make them feel like you're interested. Make sure that you have that you're inviting everyone to after work or social events, and that those social events and after work events, and even your work events are things that are activities that are going to be inclusive and that aren't going to not be accessible to everyone, for example, or make some people in your employee base feel uncomfortable or not wanting to attend. And again, making sure that you speak up when someone says something or does something that may be hurtful or offensive to others. So by developing these inclusive workplace policies and procedures, you will promote that diverse and inclusive workplace. You want to make sure that everybody's really aware of what the rules and expectations are, that you send that clear message about the values, and that you enable your organization to attract and support workers from different types of backgrounds and abilities. And again, by doing these type of things, you will create that real inclusive work environment and that inclusive work culture. There are different ways that you can do that from a policy point of view as well. Certainly having, following the legislation around harassment and discrimination policies, duty to accommodate policies, and creating a diversity and inclusion policy are good ways to ensure that you have support that environment that you're trying to ensure is very inclusive. At a minimum, you do need to have a harassment discrimination policy. There's a lot of, again, legislation around what needs to be, and depending on what province you are in, that the standards around this may vary, but you do want to make sure that you are going meets the and that also supports the your work towards an inclusive environment, and so people know what to do should they be feel that they have been discriminated against or something like that. There's a real clear process to be able to follow. So this kind of brings us to lots of information, lots of different things that you can be doing. There's lots of support out there. As I mentioned, the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council has an Agri-HR toolkit, which has all of these policies that you can download. It also has more information around templates and checklists and things like that. But really, there's three things that you want to focus on: making sure you're involving your employees as you work towards diversity and inclusion programs and policies, make sure that those workers are following the policies once they're in place. They emphasize the strength and values. So you're helping workers recognize that diversity really does strengthen the firm and contributes to its success, and that you show the workers that inclusiveness is highly valued quality. And then you also want to ensure that you're teaching employees. So, encouraging employees to work together, you're supporting them to become more inclusive and diverse, inclusive themselves. And this will really, again, help create that diverse and inclusive work environment. It will keep your recruitment to be more successful, and it will increase the retention of a diverse workforce as well. And that brings me to the end of the more formal presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. I think you've given us all a lot to think about. That was a lot of great information. I enjoyed that you shared some statistics with us too. I think that really nails it home to us as well. I liked the point that you had about adding some behaviors into job descriptions that really promote diversity and inclusion within your workforce. But then I really thought the fact that you mentioned thinking about it in terms of recruiting and being inclusive in your recruitment and your hiring policies, but then also making sure that environment that you're welcoming these people into is a welcoming environment to everybody that joins an organization without any limits or barriers. So I think that is a good thing to kind of keep in mind. I know a lot of us really think about, oh, we should be making sure we're inclusive in the way we're recruiting, but making sure that environment that somebody is coming to join is going to also hold through with those same values that we are thinking about in our recruitment process. So I am sure that you've shared lots of great info. I'm sure that our viewers today have some questions. So I encourage you to write your questions in the chat box, and I can read them out to Jen, and she can address them. I know one question already came up during your presentation, Jen, about your comment about not putting things like heavy lifting or lift requirements in a job description. There was a question about what if that person is going to be required. They need that person to do the lifting. How do we address that in an inclusive manner?
I would do a little bit of research around the best way to ensure that it's described in a way that isn't going to become across as discriminatory, for one thing, and also look at your provincial guidelines around your duty to accommodate, because you're right, there are some cases where there's just some requirements that you really can't get around, but you also want to make sure that um, that you are falling within the legislation in your province. So most of the provincial governments have really good websites with great information around what those duty to accommodate is. And if you have any questions around that, I would suggest connecting with the representatives that support that legislation with your provincial government.
Perfect. Great answer. Thank you. Uh, I have questions. So if other people don't have questions, I can ask you a couple. So you mentioned in your presentation that 17,000 immigrants are expected to enter our workforce by 2025. Would these be trained, skilled workers entering our workforce? And as an employer, what would be your advice in terms of finding access to these new immigrants to Canada? We're looking for people in agriculture. How do we connect with that group?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I'm not really sure of the breakdown from skills point of view, but what I can say is there's some really, really good regional immigrant serving organizations, immigrant serving agencies that work with newcomers and new Canadians, and they are great resources for posting jobs and hiring, because they really help the people that are new to Canada get job ready for the Canadian job work environment. They provide language training. You know, there's so much support that these organizations provide, and I think, you know, you, without connecting with them, it's kind of like expanding your lens on where you're looking, but building a relationship with your local organizations that support new Canadians is a great way to connect and see, you know, if or what type of skills they're bringing, and if that's a good match for your environment, for your farm, or where you're hiring for.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. So I see another question. Does the Canadian Ag Human Resource Council have employee training programs that could be used as part of an onboarding process with new and existing employees?
That's a really good question. We don't actually have any training programs, but within the Agri-HR toolkit, there is a whole onboarding process in there, and ways to support what you should have in place for onboarding. Onboarding is really important. It's something we didn't really talk about, but regardless of who you're hiring, you can go through a really great recruitment process. But once the person starts with your organization, if you don't take the time to make sure that they are onboarded properly, that they have, they know who's who, they know who to ask questions to, they know the basic things like, you know, everybody at lunch eats in the lunchroom together, or, you know, what time coffee break is. These real basic things. Sometimes we just are really busy and so happy that we have a new hire and you just want them to hit the ground running. We don't take the time to do that onboarding and make sure that they have the information that they need. And it's also really important from a safety point of view as well. You know, making assumptions even that someone has done the job before or grew up on a farm, so should know what to do. We all do things a bit differently. And so, you know, making sure that you're taking the time to go through things with them, review the safety protocols, make sure they know where, you know, things are, fire extinguishers, that type of thing in your environment. Like all this type of thing that we don't necessarily think about is really important and should be considered in your onboarding process.
That's great. Thank you. I have another question about kind of about that international piece. I think many of our people joining us today are employers, and if they are from a company that typically is looking only at domestic applications, do you have any thoughts or advice on if they're looking to kind of diversify their workspace, and looking at skills and people that might be the right fit for their job but not already approved to work here in Canada? Do you have any advice as to like what they should do to maybe start looking at those other candidates that might already be finding their jobs and applying to their jobs? I know at Ag Careers we get lots of international applicants, and some companies are more so just kind of wanting to focus on those domestic ones and not wanting the extra piece of the international hire. Do you have any thoughts or advice on kind of how we can go about helping that process?
Sure. So if you're referring to someone that may not have arrived in Canada yet, but would like to come to Canada, that's something that you want to make sure that you go through the proper process. The Immigration Canada, Immigration Refugee Canada, they keep changing their names, but they have some good information on their site about the process to go through. You do have to ensure that that you're, making sure that you can't hire that job locally and that you have evidence that you're not able to hire someone that's already in Canada for that role. But there's lots of examples where that's successful. If you're thinking about ways to, get to know that person and walk them through the recruitment process, we've all become very familiar and comfortable, I think, with Zoom and doing virtual meetings. So, by all means, for your interview process, you can use Zoom or do something virtual so that you're getting to know them, not just on the phone, but having conversations. But you do want to make sure that that legislation, that you review it, the steps that you need to take, and so that your process is successful, especially once you find the person and decide that they really are a good fit. And in many cases, this is happening. I know I was at a presentation not that long ago at the University of Guelph where someone was saying that they were trying to hire a farm manager out of University of Guelph. All of the students coming out were already hired, and so they ended up having to bring someone from Europe in for the role. This is happening, and that labor shortage is there, and we're all feeling it. So it is something you may want to consider and get a bit more familiar with. If you're looking with, for someone that is already here, but may come with international experience, I think it's really just thinking about the things that we just talked about opening up that, opening your mind and looking at some of your biases at what you may have when you look at a resume that comes in, for example, and being a bit more open-minded there as well. I know we're hearing a lot from employers that the focus is now really shifting to those soft skills and being able to, in many cases, train the technical on the job. So again, just thinking about where your biases may be when you're reviewing the applicants that are coming in.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you. I also see in the comment section, Jennifer Olfert said some provinces in Canada have agreements with Immigration Canada and can be helpful to get people started with foreign worker recruitment. So thank you for adding that, Jennifer. That's very helpful, a good resource for everybody. The other thing I'm putting in the chat right now as well is a link to the Feeding Your Future Agri training, just as we're thinking about employee onboarding. If you're bringing on somebody that's not super familiar with the ag industry and the importance of worker safety, through the Feeding Your Future program and through OFA, there is an Ontario Ag Worker Safety and Awareness Certificate. So if you're looking for information on that and whether that might be helpful or a resource, that is in the chat as well. I've put the link in there. So I do see another question from Mary. How does an employer go about learning appropriately what pronouns a new hire expects to be addressed by?
That's a really good question, and I think it's something that you can ask what pronouns they prefer. Sometimes you'll see it. I know many of us in our LinkedIn profiles now have our pronouns there, and just doing things like in your email signature. And so the way that you're communicating via email with someone, if you have your pronouns mentioned in your signature, Someone that wants to be very clear about the pronouns they would like to be addressed by will see that, will maybe feel a bit more comfortable in sharing with you the pronouns that they expect to be addressed by. But being open and asking the question, I think, it's becoming is a good thing to do, and is becoming definitely much more common as well. So, it goes to that being inclusive and being open to the conversations.
Awesome. That's great. I think we might be wrapping up our questions. I don't see any more in the chat, but thank you so much for your time today, Jen. It was, oh, I see another one. Are there any free training resources for new or prospective employees? For instance, the cost of the safety certificate can be prohibitive. I am not aware if you are not already employed by a company, they're not probably going to cover that for you. However, there might be opportunities to find other free resources online that could assist you while you are on your job search. If this was something that your employer had you doing, they would likely cover that cost for you. And there are lots of resources out there. I mean, some Google searches. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn after or by email. If you do have questions, I'm happy to help try and source what might be there to assist you in your job search. Do you have anything else to add, Jen, on that?
I was just going to say, on the safety side, I know the Canadian Agriculture Safety Association, CASA, they have quite a few resources on their site. They're not necessarily free, but they have good information about where to find training and things like that as well. It might be something to check out from a safety perspective.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Jen. Like I mentioned before, this webinar has been recorded. So if you would like to access it after, you'll be able to find it on our website. And then also, Jen, there was a question earlier about having access to your presentation. Would you be able to or willing to share your presentation with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send it your way. That would
So
be great.
I will email it out to all of our participants today, so you will have access to Jen's notes from today as well. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today, Jen, and thanks to all of our attendees for taking time out of your day. I'm sure that you gain lots of new ideas, and hopefully you can start making some more positive changes and implementations within your organizations. Thank you very much.
Thanks so
Thanks.
much, Katie.